Hello, I've been promising to do a sew along for the Emily dress since the beginning of the first lockdown, so I'm really sorry if you've been waiting for this, but I am finally getting round to it. Anyway, before I start demonstrating, I thought I'd just give you a quick overview of what the style is all about and tell you what I'm going to cover in this video. So the Emily dress is an A-line ladies pinafore dress. You've got a few different options with pockets and centre front seam, so you can have a seam at the centre front or the centre back, neither or both. It gives you an option if you want to do like a flat fell seam or decorative top stitching on there. And then there's the pockets. One version has like a bucket pocket which kind of goes into the side seam, curved, and quite a feature on the front. And then the other one has more classic dungaree type pockets with just a classic curved bib pocket and back pockets, but obviously you don't have to do any of the pockets, or you can do some of the pockets. You've also got the choice of inseam pockets at the side if you wanted to use those. So and again there's a couple of different lengths, but you could shorten or lengthen as you wanted. So I'm going to actually make two different versions. I'm going to make one in a jumbo cord with the bucket pockets, and then I'm going to make a classic denim one with the dungaree pockets. But today I'm going to start by applying the pockets on the cord one, and then I'll make other videos that link up to show the other parts of making it. But today I'm just going to cover making the pockets and applying the pockets for the bucket style pockets. So what you've got with the bucket pockets is you've got two pieces. You've got a pocket facing, and then you've got the pocket bag itself. So with the pocket facing, if you're using something with maybe a bit of stretch, you might want to consider interfacing this. But because this is fairly robust and not stretchy particularly, I'm going to leave this uninterfaced. I don't want it to become too bulky. So what I have done though is I've overlocked the inner edge, and you could do this with zigzag stitch, but rather than try to turn that in, which was going to make it a very tiny and also quite bulky facing, I would just either zigzag stitch it or overlock it if you've got an overlocker. And then the first thing to do is to put your facing piece to the pocket opening and pin and stitch that. So that's what I'm going to do now. And this is just a neat way of creating the edge of the pocket, and it also gives you a nice little feature top stitch once you've done this. So there we're ready to stitch that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clip into here to be able to turn this through to the other side. So I'm just going to put snips. Just check you don't catch the actual stitching. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go, you can also trim a little bit of this bulk off if you want. I mean, with this, the thickness of this cord, it might be wise to just grade the seams a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just press this in. I think if it feels too bulky, I'll go back and grade that. If not, I'm going to come back and stitch it. But right now I'm going to go off and press that and bring it back in a second. So I've pressed that, and I feel it's okay. It's not particularly, doesn't feel too bulky here, so I haven't graded the seam. So what I'm going to do now is just pin this edge down and then stitch it. There we go. So I'm just going to stitch just really on the inside of the overlock stitch, but I'll follow a gauge on the sewing machine so it's nice on the outside. So the next stage is to turn these edges in, and I have got a separate video about turning in curved edges, but we'll go through it briefly again here. But if you want a bit more, there is another video on my YouTube channel for this process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the stitch up to 5 because it's very bulky fabric, and I'm going to just stitch one row of stitching around this edge, but just within the seam allowance. And it really, you only need to go around the curve, so it doesn't matter where you start. Just start ahead of the curve and finish just behind the curve there. And if you've got a machine like this that cuts the thread, I just avoid doing that, so you've still got a tail that you can pull. And then what we're going to do is we'll just pull the ease stitching to start to gather this edge. But what you really want to do is to get, you might end up gathering it slightly, but then tease it back out so it becomes just before you get to the gather, so it just starts to curl the edge in. And then when your edge is something like that, we need to take it to the iron, and we'll just press it. And you can get more, like I said, there's a more in-depth video on here if you want to see the pressing this edge in. You can watch that, but I'm going to go and press this edge and also press the top there, and then I'll be ready to apply this to the dress. So what I've done is I've pressed the edges, I've pressed this top edge here, and I've pressed these edges in around here, and it's nice and neat, ready to apply to the dress. But what I would do at this stage is just take this pocket and lie it on top of the other pocket, and just check that your curves are sort of symmetrical and the same, because at this stage you can still tweak a little bits out if the shape is slightly different, and get them to look as even as possible. It makes it a bit nicer. And then we're ready to place that onto the dress and stitch it in place. So I've got my prepared pocket, and I've marked the notches from the pattern with little nicks along the side seam, so the pocket sits between those two notches. So you can see the top one there, the lower one, and lines up with the side seam. So all I'm going to do now is just pin that in place, and then because it's quite a bulky fabric, I'm actually going to tack this on just to give it a little bit more stability when I take it to the sewing machine. So let's just start by pinning it in place. Well, I'm actually pinning it sort of in the middle of the pocket so that it's nice and clear for me to tack around, but it's also well secured in the right place. I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to now tack this, and then, like I said, take it back to the sewing machine. So when you sew the pocket on, if you start from the top here, you're just securing that so you can then put that into the side seam when we get to that point, and this won't flap and get in the way. So there we go, I'm happy that that's nicely tacked in place, and we're ready to take that back to the machine and sew it in. So what I've done is I've checked the pockets, I've pinned and tacked one in place, the other one's just pinned at the moment, so I'll tack that one afterwards and sew them both in place, but I'm going to top stitch the one that's now tacked. So I'm just going to take some of the pins out that were holding it in place, and we shall top stitch it in place. So there we go, pockets in place. You might find that this corner here is a little bit bulky, so you could angle away some of the bulk before you stitch that on, but just be careful you don't get too close, because you don't want this folded edge to start coming out. I've slightly misjudged my tacking and I have stitched over some of it, so it'll be a little bit more tricky to unpick, but still possible. It is a bit difficult when it's a bulkier fabric, but that pocket's nicely in place now. And so I've just got to tack this one in place and stitch that on, and then we're ready to start constructing the dress. So I'll be back in the next video with the next stage of this, and I shall see you then.